The film follows a young doctor named Edward Newgate as he arrives at Stonehurst Asylum to begin his apprenticeship under the facility's director, Dr. Silas Lamb. The year is 1899, and a professor at Oxford University is giving a lecture about a case of hysteria. He explains the origins of the word and brings in a case to the lecture hall to exhibit the symptoms of hysterical behavior. The patient, Eliza Graves, is wheeled inside and sits before the students. Eliza has been under the professor's care at Bethlehem Hospital. She has suffered all her life and shows symptoms such as lassitude and hysterical fits. He informs his students that her convulsions can become uncontrollable, which is why she is constantly injected with. Eliza looks at the doctor with frightened eyes. She begs him not to hurt her and turns to the students for help, screaming that she is not mad, but no one believes her. The professor uses his force on her and grabs her by her hips, which he describes as a sensitive spot to his students. She instantly clenches her fists, and her body completely spasms. The students watch the scene and write their observations in their notebooks. They question the professor about the possibility that the woman might be sane, but the professor affirms that Eliza is mad. Edward Newgate crosses a bushy forest to reach Stonehurst Asylum. He sees a carriage passing by in the distance and calls the man riding it to take him to the facility. The man is accompanied by his daughter. The little girl tells Edward that people are usually walking away from the madhouse, and is surprised that he is walking toward it. Edward tells the little girl that he is training as an alienist. She smiles at him and tells him he has kind eyes. Stonehurst Asylum is a mysterious place hidden behind the fog. Edward cautiously walks towards its gate and shakes it because it is locked. A man comes out of nowhere and questions Edward's identity. His name is Mickey Finn. At first, he gives Edward a hard time and keeps him in the cold for too long, but then he laughs and teases him. Mickey finally welcomes Edward inside the asylum and gives him a tour. Upon Edward's arrival, he hears distant screams and wailing sounds. Mickey takes him to Dr. Silas Lamb's office, where Edward finds the man's many experiments. He takes hold of a skull and observes the hole in it. Edward almost drops it when Silas finally enters the room. Silas asks Edward why he chose his field of study. Before he gets to answer, Mickey joins them, sneaking behind Edward and making him jump in his place. Edward has always been fascinated by the troubled mind. Silas asks what Edward intends to gain from this profession. He tells Silas that he wants to help those who have a hellish life. Madness changes people, and Edward believes it is worse than death. He begs the doctor to give him a chance. Silas tells Edward to join him, even though he didn't expect his arrival, and Mickey, who is behind them, looks at the young apprentice with suspicion. Edward sees the patients of the asylum and learns about their unique problems. One of them believes he is an Arabian stallion. He gets agitated and neighs all day. Silas gives Edward apples to feed the madman, but he ends up pulling Edward's arm, refusing to let it go. Silas threatens to groom him, so he gives Edward his arm back. Edward disagrees with Silas's way of handling the man's sickness. The doctor believes that the man should spend his life as a happy horse, and Edward doesn't understand how that would work. Silas celebrates his patient's craziness and refuses to sedate them. He doesn't approve of the feeding tube even when one of his patients is about to die from hunger. Edward finds Stonehurst Asylum stranger than any place he has ever been. From the first floor, he watches the patients dance. Eliza is one of Silas's patients, and she is playing the piano to entertain the others. She immediately catches Edward's attention. Silas states that Eliza is afraid of her intense emotions, so music is her cure. Silas tells Edward about Eliza's husband, who is a wealthy man. After Eliza discovered his disloyalty, her hysteric episodes became intolerable. Eliza bit off her husband's ear and gouged out his eye with a comb, so her father took it upon himself to send her to the asylum. Her father keeps sending Silas letters weekly to release her daughter because she has spent too much time in the asylum. But Silas refuses because he wishes to keep her safe. Eliza looks at Edward, and he smiles, but Silas takes him away. In front of the mirror, Edward practices the lines he plans to use on Eliza. They are about her magnificent talent and incredible beauty. Then, music from one side of the asylum gets him out of his room to follow the beautiful tune. Everyone watches Eliza playing a sad song on the piano. She looks like a tortured angel, and everyone claps when she finishes. Eliza asks the nurse, Millie, to get her a glass of water because she looks very affected by the piece she just played. Edward calls her song sublime, and when he tries to introduce himself, she flinches and refuses to shake his hand. Because the patients don't receive any visitors, Eliza already knows his name. Edward's compliments make Eliza uncomfortable, but she is charmed by his honesty. Edward is a modest doctor and informs her that he is not like the other doctors she knows. In the staff parlor, Silas doesn't mind that his patients join him for the Christmas dinner. Edward has trouble accepting the way he runs the asylum. They eat together with patients and Edward finds that unacceptable, but he doesn't say anything. They ask him questions because they wish to get to know him. He tells them about his poor childhood in an orphanage. His vulnerability and kindness catch everyone's attention, including Eliza, who smiles at him. The patients raise a toast to Mickey. Edward laughs and asks him if Mickey Finn is really his name, alluding to the saying, "Slip someone a Mickey Finn." Edward didn't mean to make things awkward, but no one finds his comment funny. Mickey seriously looks at him, and so do the others. Then, Mickey bursts out laughing, but his reaction is fake. He then makes a dirty joke. Edward tells him he doesn't find what he said amusing. And then Mickey doubts anything could make Edward laugh. To stop the two from fighting, Silas asks Mickey to stop. He apologizes and offers Edward a drink. Eliza is scared. She, as well as the other patients, look curiously at Mickey pouring the drink into Edward's glass. Edward accepts the drink, and that seems to frighten Eliza. She looks around her as if wishing to do something, and just when he raises his glass, she kicks him in the leg, making him pour its content over his clothes. Edward looks at her questioningly, wondering why she did that. Eliza decides to help Edward, and as they leave the dinner table, Silas and Mickey share a suspicious look. Edward follows Eliza to the kitchen. She tells him to leave immediately because he doesn't belong here. Instead, he tells her that he feels the same way about her. She is not like the others. Afraid of what might happen to her, she refuses to tell him what's going on and hurries to leave the room. To stop her, he tries to touch her hand, but she curls her fists and stands unmoving. He apologizes to her, but she quickly runs out. Back in his room, Edward takes his little gun out for precaution. He hears a scary sound from behind his desk and finds out that the air vent transmits the noise coming from the boiler room. Edward enters the dark room and walks down to find that a man is responsible for the sound. He moves through a silent hallway where cages surround him. And then, a man reaches out to grab him. Just when he asks for Edward's help, other people start screaming at the same time. Edward looks around him with a frightened expression. He didn't expect to find so many people in the boiler room, and they were all kept inside cages. They beg him to release them, but he doesn't understand what is happening. Edward tells them he is a doctor, and one man, in particular, doesn't believe him. Edward tells him he is from Oxford, and the man emerges from the shadows. He tells Edward that he has to help them because they are not mad. Edward lets them know that he will seek the help of Silas, but they tell him that the doctor will kill him. Unable to grasp what he sees, Edward walks back to where he came from, but a woman's scream surprises him. She calls him by his full name, making him halt in his place. Edward turns around and asks the woman why she knows his name. She tells him that she saw the letter he sent before his arrival. It came just before Silas overthrew them. Edward didn't understand her use of words. He asks her what she meant by being overthrown by the doctor. The woman introduces herself as Marion Pike, the matron. The man next to her tells Edward that he is Charles Swanwick, the chief medical officer. Then the nurse and the groundskeeper also wave at him. Also, the man from earlier announces that he is, in fact, Dr. Benjamin Salt, the rightful superintendent of the asylum. Edward realizes that this means Silas Lamb is the madman. He had put something in the asylum staff's drinks and released all the patients to work by his side. At that moment, Edward understands the true meaning behind the use of Mickey Finn. It is what slipped them so they could continue their lives freely. Benjamin knows they are outnumbered, so he urges Edward to run away. He goes straight to Eliza's room and tells her they must leave. He informs her of what he has found, and she worries that they might catch him now that he knows the truth. Edward refuses to leave without her, and before they run away, Silas and Mickey appear out of nowhere. Eliza lies and tells them that Edward needed directions to the library. Mickey takes Edward to his room. Silas asks Eliza if Edward is suspicious of his scheme, but she assures him that he doesn't know anything. She tells him that he can't keep those innocent people in the boiler room forever, but Silas doesn't see anything wrong with that because it's exactly how they treated him and the others. Edward steals as much food as possible from the kitchen and visits the poor prisoners. Benjamin wants him to grab guns instead, but Edward tells him that he is scrutinized. He tells them that he is taking Eliza with him when he releases them, but Benjamin believes she is one of them, as mad and evil. Edward suggests that he works alongside Silas until he finally makes him see sense. Benjamin informs him that Silas cold-bloodedly killed 5 soldiers, so there is no hope for him. Edward asks for Silas's case file, and Benjamin guides him straight to it. Before he leaves the boiler room, Benjamin warns him that Silas might have something terrible planned for him, which no one knows, so he should be careful. Silas tells Edward about his next plans to give the patients their freedom back. Edward seems skeptical, and that alarms Silas. He takes him to an empty wing of the asylum, where a madman they call the Ogre of Oxbridge is kept like an animal. Silas asks Edward to change the man's dressing because he was injured the day before after attacking the nurse. Edward tries to avoid the task, but Silas insists he should receive clinical experience. Edward goes down the hole where the man is imprisoned. He is expected to treat the man without sedating him. When the man stands up to face the visitor, he appears far taller than Edward and much stronger. He attacks him and throws him against the wall. Edward catches a glimpse of his scribbles there and reads the name Arthur. When the man starts choking Edward, he calls him by his name, and his facial expressions suddenly soften. Arthur, who really looks like an ogre, takes a step back. Edward apologizes because he didn't mean to invade his space. Arthur warms up to him, and Silas watches their interaction with pride. Eliza finds Edward in the nursery and tends to his injuries. Edward whispers to her that she is in danger. Eliza asks about the people in the boiler room because she worries they are suffering. Although she doesn't agree with how they are treated, she tries to make Edward understand that no one went easy on her, because she was subjected to much more physical torture and psychological welfare. Eliza stands up and tells him he can never understand what she went through. Before she escapes, Edward holds her hand and shows her the scars on his body. Eliza touches him and feels closer to him after she understands that he is no stranger to pain. Edward can't accept that such a beautiful soul stays in a madhouse because she deserves happiness. In the boiler room, Charles removes the window railing and finally feels hope that he can escape from that hole. On the other hand, Edward secretly enters Silas's office and finds his case file. Before he gets a full read of it, he hears Silas coming closer. Mickey is with him. He wonders why they have not thrown Edward in the boiler room. He suggests that Silas make him a doctor, because how hard can that be? Silas speaks like a reasonable man. He scolds him and tells him that his talent is needed for other duties. Mickey remarks that Silas has been different ever since Edward showed up. He tells him that he reminds him of himself. Edward eavesdrops on their conversation, and his hiding spot is almost found, but he gets away with it in the end. Mickey doesn't trust Edward, but Silas thinks he won't cause any problems unless Eliza stays by his side, and he will make sure that never happens. At that moment, alarms go off, warning them about the escape of two prisoners, Charles and the former groundskeeper. Mickey goes after them, but the escapees run all the way to the edge of the mountain. The groundskeeper finds no other solution but to jump, leaving Charles alone, who is ultimately captured and killed. Charles's body is taken to the asylum and is inspected by Edward. Mickey lies and tells him that his death was an accident, but Edward inquires about the scars he found on his back. Mickey makes up another lie, which angers Edward. He screams at Silas and calls the way he handles things around the asylum madness. Triggered by the word, Silas pushes Edward to repeat what he said. Silas is enraged by Edward's accusation and blames him for the deaths of those who escaped. Silas loses his temper and at that moment, experiences a flashback. He walks back inside the asylum calmly. Edward carefully studies Silas's file and learns about his service as a military surgeon. He reads Benjamin's notes, in which he observes that Silas refuses to talk about his experience in the military. Like all other patients, Silas went through the same harsh techniques Benjamin used to treat their illnesses. He shows no fear and continues to torment Benjamin with his stubbornness, and sees him as a pawn in his chess match. For 9 years, Benjamin tried to figure out why the man is so deranged and still cannot figure it out to this day. In the boiler room, Silas visits Benjamin wearing one of his suits. Silas hopes that the other prisoners avoid their old friend's stupid mistake because there is no way out of the asylum. Silas starts coughing badly but continues to report to Benjamin about the patient's progress. He lets him know that they are happy and thriving. Benjamin suspects that Silas's cough results from his exposure to opium, which is overused by addicted patients. Benjamin asks if Silas has had enough fun with the illusion he created and hopes that he stops deceiving himself and others. Then, he reminds him of the reason why he was sent to the asylum, which is killing innocent soldiers. Silas stands up abruptly and asks Mickey to take Edward to the operation room. Edward keeps the patient's company and convinces the starving woman to eat by pretending to be her son. Eliza witnesses the beautiful moment. It brings a genuine smile to her face. Eliza tells Edward that Millie, who takes the nurse role, is doing better because Silas took her off her medication. Eliza can't leave Millie because she has grown to love her like a sister. Edward takes Eliza's hand and tells her he is ready to take them both with him somewhere the sun shines brightly. Mickey finds Edward and takes him to Silas. The experiment he is running is on none other than Benjamin. Edward watches the old man with a scared expression, fearing what is about to happen next. Silas describes Benjamin as delusional and wishes to treat his sickness. He wants to put an end to old barbaric techniques like straitjackets, cold baths, nausea machines, and floggings, which Benjamin used on him. Silas is excited to use electrotherapy on him and asks for Edward's assistance. Silas electrocutes the man, but Edward argues that Benjamin might suffer from a heart attack, but Silas asks him to personally electrocute the poor man. Edward tries to be brave and does as he is told. Silas asks Benjamin if he still believes he is the superintendent of the asylum. When he tells him he doesn't know, Silas concludes that the technique he used is efficient. Benjamin no longer remembers anything, and Edward tells him that he is one of their patients. Things get worse in the asylum. Patients are out of control and doing as they please. Edward tries his best to treat the prisoners who suffer from all kinds of illnesses due to the harsh conditions they are kept in. The matron tells Edward to treat Silas as his patient. That way, he might have a chance at curing him because he is not entirely evil. Silas organizes a party for all the patients, and Benjamin attends it as well. He watches the madness before him unfold. Edward is happy to see Eliza, who looks divine in her beautiful dress. He asks her for a favor, to tell Silas that he has gone outside for some fresh air. Eliza asks him about what he is planning, and Edward lets her know that he will soon put an end to this masquerade. Dinner is served in the middle of the dance floor. Everyone is distracted by the food, so Eliza heads to the boiling room. Billy, alone in the foyer, speaks to herself and dances freely. Mickey finds her and on her. She pushes him away, but then runs to his arms to kiss him. He touches her face slowly, and his fingers caress her neck. They dig into her skin, and Edward thinks about Silas's cure in the man's old cell. He finds something hidden inside his wall. Silas tells the patients that Millie died of a heart attack. Eliza hugs her body and refuses to let anybody touch it. Arthur looks at her, asking for her trust, and takes Millie outside. Convinced that nothing should ruin the festive mood, Silas asks the patients to prepare champagne to celebrate the arrival of a new century. Mickey finds Edward spiking the champagne. He holds his knife out but is surprised when Edward brings a gun out of his pocket. Edward shoots Mickey's hand, but even when his hand is bleeding, he runs toward him and tries to punch him. Edward defends himself as much as he can. Edward picks up a shovel and swings it at Mickey, and when he falls, he pulls down a lever to pour pounds of coal all over him. Outside the asylum, Silas pours champagne for everyone and hands Edward a glass. Before anyone has a drink, Mickey runs out screaming, covered in coal, yelling that they shouldn't drink the champagne. Silas takes Edward by surprise and hits him in the head with the bottle. Silas gathers all the patients to witness the demonstration of a new experiment as if he is a true doctor, and the patients are his students. Edward is now tied down to a chair. Eliza finds him strapped down and shows him his pocket watch, which holds a picture of her. She calls him a liar and asks him if her husband sent him. Edward confesses that he came to the asylum for her because he was one of the students at the lecture in Oxford. He was bewildered by her beauty and promised himself to do whatever it takes to save her. His lie scares Eliza. She tells him that she doesn't like being possessed, but Edward, with a pained expression, cries and tells her it is Eliza who possesses him. Silas tells Edward that everyone is mad, but only a few admit it. Before he electrocutes him, Edward requests that he deliver a photograph to Eliza, which he placed in his pocket. Silas takes it out and sees the young boy he killed. He is immediately haunted by his memory and sees him standing on the other side of the room. Silas is driven to tears and remembers the moment he killed him. He walks outside, and Mickey keeps calling for him, but he doesn't return. Mickey takes the lead and decides to be the doctor. Eliza runs to save Edward. She pushes his chair against Mickey's back, making him fall. She then quickly tries to untie him, but Mickey takes hold of her. She curls her fists, but Edward asks her to look at him, and that gives her strength. She kicks Mickey. Edward tells Arthur to hit the switch so Eliza can electrocute Mickey. As this latter holds onto the rods for too long, his hair is set on fire and his clothes catch the flames, starting a massive fire inside the asylum. Edward steals the keys from Mickey's belt and runs to save the prisoners with Eliza's help. Silas roams the asylum's hallways, remembering the horrid things he had seen and done in the military. To stop the soldiers' suffering, he killed them all, and when he finally decided as well, he ran out of bullets. Edward finds Silas and takes his hand. Silas tells him that he saved the soldiers and then hugs Edward. Edward takes Silas out, who refuses to speak to anyone. He finds Eliza outside, and the two look at the beautiful sunrise, promising new beginnings. Edward suggests they leave this place, but she can't imagine living somewhere other than Stonehurst Asylum. Edward tells her he is not sane either, because he is madly in love with her. Edward's mind seems to be clouded by something he is keeping from Eliza. He tells her that he wanted to let her know of a bigger secret but was afraid. Sometime later, Eliza's husband comes looking for her at the asylum, accompanied by the doctor who was responsible for her safety. Arthur is now the groundskeeper, and Benjamin is still recovering from his traumatic experience. He is actually playing chess with Silas. The matron informs the doctor that Eliza has been discharged 3 weeks before on the orders of Dr. Edward Newgate. The man looks in disbelief and tells her that he is Dr. Edward Newgate. The young man is not a doctor, he is, in fact, a cunning and deranged patient he used to take care of in Bethlehem Hospital. After Eliza's demonstration, he was next to enter the lecture hall. He became obsessed with Eliza and managed to escape the hospital to find the woman he fell in love with. The unnamed man took the identity of Silas Lamb and is now living in Italy with his lover Eliza, now known as Mrs. Lamb.